In this lecture, we are going to look at the Baroque style of art that started in about the 17th century. Again, you see the dates are circa 1600 to 1750. This is another one of those squishy dates, if you will, because we don't have the hard and fast times of when this style started. However, it did begin in Italy, and the term Baroque actually is from the Portuguese word barocco, which means a large, irregularly shaped pearl. And when it was first applied to the artistic style, it was meant as a negative term. However, after a time period, people became more accepting of the Baroque style, it lost the negative aspect to it. Now, the Baroque style, you're still going to see a little bit of the influence from the Renaissance. We're not going to see as oddly proportioned and misshaped figures as we saw in Mannerism. However, what makes Baroque so different is that it believed art should communicate, that it should have emotion in the work, and the work should produce emotion in the viewer. That there needed to be details, exacting details in the work that were there to produce drama. And this drama was created through tension, exuberance, opulence, and the grandeur of the artistic style. In the Baroque, you also have open composition, meaning the works, your eye would move throughout the work and eventually off the canvas or out of the sculpture. Historically, this is also the time period of the Counter-Reformation. This was the church's response to the Protestant Reformation, and what we're going to see here is we're going to see the church's attempt to bring people back into the church. And this was done through the Council of Trent. There were 3 different meetings that were held from 1545 to 1563. And this was where the church was addressing the concerns that had been raised within the Protestant Reformation. We've talked about this a little bit earlier. This is when the church also went on a large art building program. St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican was created at this time. And your textbook talks about this. However, it focuses more on the courtyard and the columns that were actually created by Bernini. Okay? And that's who we're going to look at first. First, we're going to look at sculpture. Again, the works were to appeal to the emotions of the viewer, and it invited participation instead of just neutral observation. The feelings are probably best seen in the work that you're looking at here. This is Bernini's. Bernini's dates are 1598 to 1680. This is the St. Teresa in Ecstasy, or it's also known as the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, 1645 to 1652, and it's marble. It's located in the Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. And here what we see is St. Teresa was known for her belief that religion, that knowing God's love is a moment of ecstasy, that there is nothing so pure and yet so painful at the same time. We know a lot about her because she actually wrote her autobiography, and in it she states that this moment that she's captured here is when her heart has been pierced by the golden arrow of God's love. And you can see the smiling angel with the arrow in his right hand, and he has just pulled it from her heart. And what she said about this was, "The pain was so great that I screamed aloud. But at the same time, I felt such infinite sweetness that I wished the pain to last forever. It was the sweetest caressing of the soul by God." And that's what Bernini has captured in this moment, that it is full of that ecstasy, that passion. When you look at her face, you can see she is caught in that very emotional moment. And then everything else from this sculpture is also planned. The gold behind, and if you look at the image on the right, even the church it is in is an example of the Baroque style. Bernini designed it to be in this space. So when you look at the architecture, very extravagant, very elegant. It's supposed to, again, create this moment of awe, of drama. The color of the marble, the green, the pink, the white that was used. Even the gold behind, so when the light shines, it looks as if the light of God is shining down. And then you'll also notice the detailed work and the scroll work and the capitals of the columns and how ornate and detailed those are. However, what you'll see in the Baroque, though, it's also very symmetrical, that if we cut this on a vertical axis, it would actually be a mirror image of each other. Next, we're going to look at another sculpture by Bernini, and this is going to be the one you see on the right. This is Bernini's David, 1623, made of marble, and it's in the Galleria Borghese in Rome. Now, what we have here is I want you to compare this to two other Davids that we've seen, and that way you can see the difference in the styles. So first on the left, we see Donatello's David, 1430 to 1440. This was the bronze of the early Renaissance. And here again, we see the youthful David shown. And he is shown this way because in the biblical story, remember, he was referred to as the beautiful youth. So Donatello was capturing him as he actually would have been, showing that Renaissance ideal, early Renaissance ideal. Next is Michelangelo's David, 1501 to 1504, marble. And here we see the ideals of the high Renaissance, where we have the mathematical symmetry, that we have that ideal form within this. Again, showing that, showing the high Renaissance ideals. And then we see Bernini's David, 1623, marble. And here you can see that emotion, that tension. Unlike the other two Davids, Donatello's David, Goliath has already been slain. We know that he's standing on, his head. In Michelangelo's David, it's at the same time the moment before and the moment after Goliath has been slain, so we know what the outcome is. However, Bernini's David is that moment right before he slings the stone. And you can see that his body is twisted. It's pretty much at its furthest point back, and it's the moment right before he's going to release the stone. So in this one, part of the drama is we don't yet know the end of the story. We don't know how or who's going to be victorious. What's interesting in this is that the work is so lifelike that you know which path the stone is going to go on, and people actually don't like to stand there because they feel like the sculpture at any moment is going to whip around and release the stone. Now let's turn our focus to painting. First, we're going to explore probably the most famous of the Baroque painters, and this is Caravaggio, 1573 to 1610. His birth name is actually Michelangelo Merci, but he went by Caravaggio, which was the name of his hometown, which was a small city near Milan, Italy. He again is the most significant of the Roman Baroque painters. If you're wanting to look up some interesting facts about him, he led a very turbulent life. He was known for his hot temper, and in fact, he was actually wanted for murder, and so had to flee certain areas because of this murder charge. However, he often painted religious themes, and what he did with these was he painted them usually in a manner that he would put these scenes into normal everyday situations. We'll see that in the next work. But he would use this chiaroscuro technique. Remember, that's Italian for light and shade. And he would do this to produce the drama within the work itself. He used realistic imagery in everyday situations, as you'll see in the Calling of St. Matthew, that takes place in a tavern. So here you can see that dramatic use of light and shadow. This is the Crucifixion of St. Peter, 1601, and it is an oil on canvas. What we've got here, again, we're capturing a moment in the middle of the action. If you don't know the story of St. Peter was actually also crucified. And you can see here, this is the moment he's already been nailed to the cross. Look at his feet, and then look at his hand, his left hand in the the lower right foreground. You'll see that he's already nailed to the cross. And this is the moment right before he's being hoisted up. Now what you'll note is he's actually being crucified upside down. And he requested this because he did not believe he was worthy enough to be crucified in the same way Christ had been. So we see many things here. Again, the very, very dark background. This is something that would have taken place outside. There would have been plenty of natural light. However, Caravaggio has painted it this way to create the drama. Your eye is automatically drawn into St. Peter in the middle. He's wrapped in a very, very white cloth, and even his skin itself seems to be glowing. Then your eye probably moves around, follows the wood of the cross to the three other figures in the work. They all have some sort of bright aspect to them, the red shirt, the blue pants, the white shirt, to draw our eye there. However, what is interesting is we do not see any of their faces, that they're either turned away from us or they're in shadow, giving a sense of shame that they are not happy with what they are doing. They know what they're doing is wrong. But again, you see this drama created by Caravaggio within the work. You can see it in this work too. This is the Calling of St. Matthew, circa 1599 to 1602, and it is an oil on canvas. Again, this tells a biblical tale. This is the moment where Jesus calls to Matthew to join the cause. And look at the light here. The light is coming from the upper right. Even though we have an open window right above them, this does not appear to be a light source. And the lighting, again, is used to highlight what Caravaggio wants you to focus on. Follow the bottom line of it, and it goes from Jesus' outstretched hand right onto the face of Matthew. And Matthew is the center man at the table with the beard who's kind of pointing to himself like, who, me? And this actually takes place within a tavern. Matthew was a tax collector when Jesus came to call on him. And then interesting enough, on the right with Jesus and another disciple, they're dressed in rags. And you can tell that the figure is Jesus because look, very shortly above his head, there's a very, very thin line, and that is supposed to be the halo. So again, you see this dramatic use of light and shade to produce drama and to draw our eye into the work itself. Next, we're actually going to look at a female artist. And we've already talked about how rare female artists were, mainly because they often could not or were not allowed to get training. However, this is Artemisia Gentileschi. She was trained by her father, Orazio Gentileschi, who was also an artist. Her works are often a lot of them look a lot like Caravaggio's, especially this work here. This is Judith slaying Holofernes. This one is actually the second version of the work. The first one she created 1614 to 1620. This one, however, is circa 1620, and it's an oil on canvas. Now, if you were doing research and you just Googled Judith slaying Holofernes, probably the first painting that would come up would be Caravaggio's, because they both painted this subject, and the works look very, very similar. Again, this shows a biblical tale. The story is that Judith, who you can see here, she's the one holding the sword, she was a Jewish widow, and she actually lures Holofernes, who was the leader of Nebuchadnezzar's Assyrian army. To save her town, she actually lures him back to his tent. She gets him drunk, and then she and her maid cut off his head with his own sword. Again, we see the Baroque drama within this work. Why? Because the moment that is captured, Caravaggio, Artemisia, and Gestalt were not the first two to paint this scene. However, or the story. However, usually it was after it had already been done, and you would see Judith and her maid carrying a basket, and Holofernes' head would be in the basket. But this moment is full of drama. This is the moment they are actually killing him. Again, you can see the very dark background and the use of light to draw our eyes in. Your eyes are drawn towards the center till Holofernes' head, where Artemisia, you can see she's gripping his hair and she's holding him down. The sword is his own sword, and again, you can see the blood running down the bed, and we also know this is the moment of killing because the blood is spurting up. For the blood to be spraying like that, we know the heart still has to be beating. Now, unlike Caravaggio's The Crucifixion of St. Peter, where the men had turned away, these women are not turning away. We can clearly see their faces and the determination on it. They are proud of what they are doing because they are doing it to help save their people. Interesting enough, Artemisia in her own life faced some violence. She was actually raped by one of her teachers, and her father put the teacher on trial. However, Artemisia was actually tortured to see if she was telling the truth, and eventually her rapist actually got away. He was not punished at all. Well, many people see in her artworks that she usually paints scenes where women are taking control, and many people believe this is because in her own life that she was not able to take control, she was not able to react against what the men had done to her, so in the artworks was a way of her to handle this. Next, we're going to look at Rembrandt, 1606 to 69. He was from Amsterdam, from the Holland area, and he is most well known probably for his use of light. Rembrandt created many, many works throughout his lifetime, and here you're going to see probably one of the most well known. This is the militia company of Captain Frans Banning Cook mustering his company. However, it's commonly known as the Night Watch. 1642, oil on canvas. This is a very, very large work. It's almost 12 feet by 14 feet 4 inches. And the painting is now in a museum in Amsterdam. However, when it was originally commissioned, it was commissioned by the company to hang in their clubhouse. What we see here is that Rembrandt within the work is again using light to draw our eye to where he wants us to see. There's really not a natural light source. However, you can see in the center Captain Cook and probably his first are highlighted. And then throughout the work where he wants our eyes to be drawn, that's where the light seems to fall on people's faces. Interestingly enough, many people consider that this took place at night. However, it was found out once the painting was cleaned. It was actually just pretty dirty. And it was supposed to be a moment where they were either inside or in some darker hallway and the group of people were walking out into the sun. And then I mentioned earlier that Rembrandt was known for lighting. And in fact, Rembrandt lighting is a lighting technique that is still used today in portrait photography. It's called Rembrandt lighting because, as you can see in this portrait here, and this is a self-portrait of Rembrandt, 1658, oil on canvas, what it does is it creates a natural, softer look on the sitter. So here, in today's day and age, you can achieve it using one light and a reflector or two lights, but it became popular because it's capable of producing images which appear both natural and compelling with a very little bit of equipment. And how you can tell the Rembrandt lighting is it's characterized by an illuminated triangle under the eye of the subject on the much less illuminated side of the face. So if you're looking at the self-portrait here we see the light clearly falling on the right side of Rembrandt's face, yet look at the other side. It's mostly in shadow except for that triangle below the left eye. And again, this gave it a very natural look, yet it's also very complementary to the sitter. All right, the next artist we're going to look at is Jan Vermeer, 1632 to 1675. He was born in Delft, which is in the Netherlands, in South Holland. The image I have here is different from the one in your textbook. This one I put up probably because it's his most well-known work. It's Girl with a Pearl Earring, circa 1665, and it's an oil on canvas. And here you can still clearly see Vermeer's work. What's interesting about him is he would only paint for local patrons, and he would show the domestic scenes that would show everyday life. And you see that in the painting in the textbook. And what he uses light for was he wanted light to show textures, to give a sense of drama through realism. And in fact, the painting in your textbook, if you look closely enough at the details, you can see things such as the plate and I think it's a picture, you can actually see the reflection of the rest of the room in it. So this very finite detail is what produces the drama. And you can see that in this painting also, The Girl with a Pearl Earring. This is not a typical portrait. It's what's called a trone. And what this was, it was a Dutch 17th century description of a head painting that was not meant to be a portrait. Again, this is a moment that he is capturing. And here it depicts a European girl wearing an exotic dress, an oriental turban, and an improbably large pearl earring. But you can see again the use of highlights, the use of light to show the texture and the detail in the work. Next, we have another female artist, Rachel Roush, 1664 to 1750. She also, like Vermeer, was known for her attention to detail, and her work is almost scientific. In fact, she was trained by her father, Frederick Roush, who was a scientist. And so when you see this, it's not just a still life of flowers, but scientifically it is exactly correct, down to the tiniest, smallest little details here. And within this work, you can see the drama created by the bright colors, the use of light, but again, the scientific knowledge that goes into the work. Next, we're going to look at Peter Paul Rubens, 1577 to 1640. He was born in Germany, however, he studied in Italy and then finally set up shop in Antwerp, which is now in northern Belgium. He was a very, very successful artist. He was actually probably the most financially successful artist of his time. What became interesting is he produced many works because he ran his studio almost like a factory. And what would happen was he would have other people, apprentices, working for him, and they would do work on pieces, and then he would do work on pieces, on the same piece. And what would happen was he would actually set the price of a work, showing how much work he actually did on it. So imagine if this was a painting that you were going to buy, and if it was very cheap, then you would know Rubens actually did not do a lot of the work himself. If it was very expensive, that means he did most of the work. Rubens is also known, if you've heard the term Rubenesque before, this refers to a very fleshy, curvaceous female form that he was very well known for painting. And you can actually see that in this work here down at the bottom with the mermaids. They're the very fleshy, very lifelike, very curvaceous. Many of his works often have a warmth to them that other Baroque painters were missing. Well, what we're seeing here, though, this is Marie de Medici, Queen of France, landing in Marseille, 1622 to 25, and it's an oil on canvas. What this work is, it's actually a series of 21 large oil paintings that were commissioned by Marie de Medici, who was the Queen of France. And she acted when her husband died, her young son became king. However, she acted as regent in his stead before he came to age. And so what she wanted from Rubens was she wanted a large series of paintings that would depict her life. But the ultimate goal of it was to glorify the queen. Well, how Rubens did this he would take just normal everyday moments and he would create them into these great spectacles, which you see here. This is the moment where she is stepping off of a ship, not a big deal. However, Rubens has created it as a mass production. You can see in the top, the winged figure, that is Fame, and Fame is blowing trumpets to herald her coming. You can see the elegantness in the clothes, the details, and then down below in the water, that's actually Poseidon who has come with his mer people to welcome her. So even the gods are excited that she is coming. And then this is another work by Rubens. I wanted to show you this to show some of the action scenes that he was known for creating. This is Hippopotamus and Crocodile Hunt, 1615 to 1616, and it's also an oil on canvas. Now, this is not realistic. However, it's making a statement, right? The statement is about man's struggle with the beasts as well as with nature as a whole. It's a painting of opposites between the smooth and the scaly and the dark and light. And we see this again. The moment that is captured is a very dynamic moment, but it looks as if the hippopotamus is about to be slain, yet look at the crocodile. It appears maybe he's already taken out one man, and the crocodile doesn't seem to be in real trouble. And so this painting is an excellent example of the Baroque style because it uses vivid colors to portray a dramatic and highly emotional scene. The layout of the painting is actually slightly off-center, with most of the action happening in the left side of the painting, and to the right you actually have a little bit of a calm spot. Look in the right, in the center, you can see there's like a palm tree and a nice sky in the distance. The Hippopotamus and Crocodile Hunt is a great example of how artists of the Baroque captured emotion and movement. The next painter we're going to look at is Diego Velázquez, 1599 to 1660, and he was a Spanish painter. In fact, he was a royal painter to King Philip IV. Many portraits, he was known for creating portraits, and many of the portraits were very true to the sitter's appearance. However, what's very interesting is this image here, called Maids of Honor, 1656, and it's an oil on canvas. Again, it's a large work. It's almost 10.5 feet by 9 feet. And it was originally called the family of Philip IV. Now, what's interesting about this is this actually a portrait, or is it a genre painting? When in fact, it's both. What we see here is we actually see Velázquez on the left creating a portrait. But who is he actually painting the portrait of? Look in the mirror in the center background, and we actually see the king and queen sitting there. So Velázquez is actually painting a portrait of the king and queen within the painting. Yet what we, the viewer, see within this work is the young daughter, Princess Marguerite, and she's being given a glass of water. We can see the queen and her maids, the queen's maids, her friends. There's a nun, a dwarf, and a dog all gather around the young princess. And so as we, the viewer, look at it, it almost looks like this is a portrait of her, but this is the genre painting, right? We're capturing a moment. And this is even more convincing when you look further in the background, you see somebody leaving the room and climbing the stairs. So here we have both a portrait, right, of the king and queen. Look in the mirror. It almost seems to be a framed portrait. But also it's that moment, that genre painting, capturing that moment of the family together. Then we have Nicolas Poussin, 1594 to 1665, and he is a French painter. His work's more classical and restrained than some of the other Baroque painters that we've seen. And here he favored more academic and more historical paintings. He claimed his goal in his works was to actually improve the moral standard of the viewer. And you're going to see this here in The Rape of the Sabine Women, circa 1636 to 37, and it's an oil on canvas. And this one, if you're ever in New York, it's actually in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can go see this. So what we see here is, again, it's considered Baroque because we do have that drama. We're in the middle of a moment. And what happens, though, this is a moment unlike, think of Bernini's sculpture of David, right, before the action happens. This is in the middle of the action, but the action is pretty frozen. And the importance of the work depends on the viewer knowing and understanding the story behind it. So with The Rape of the Sabine Women, this depicts one of the mythical episodes surrounding the history of ancient Rome. What we see here is the city of Rome has just been founded by Romulus. Romulus is the man standing in the left background in the red robe. And what happens is that Rome is almost entirely made of males. There aren't a lot of females there. And so they want to ensure the prosperity of their young nation. And so what they do to get the females there is they invite their neighbors, the Sabines, over for a feast. Well, what happens in the middle of the feast, they actually seize all of the women and they drive the men off. And that's the moment that is captured here, where the women are being taken away and the men are being chased away. Well, 3 years later, as the story goes, the Sabines actually attack Rome in revenge. However, the conflict is prevented because the women who have stayed in Rome are now with their husbands, and they stand between their husbands and their brothers. And what we see here is Poussin has chosen to illustrate the scene of the abduction. Again, Romulus stands on the left, dominating the proceedings, and his pose is directly inspired by imperial statues. In the central section, you can see the emphasis is on the panic and the confrontation between the men and women. And then this all takes place against an architectural background and linear perspective. You can see in the far right background, right, we see clearly a Roman arch there. And this gives the work a vanishing point. Well, next let's turn our attention to architecture. Architecture again shows this Baroque style, and it's in the drama, the opulence of it. And the greatest example of that is the Palace of Versailles, which you see here. The Palace of Versailles was created for the French king Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King. And what he wanted something further away from Paris, a place he could get away to. And Versailles is about 11 miles southwest of Paris. But you can see here all of these Baroque ideas and this opulence and this grandeur. In the top left, you can see part of the facade. The building is very long. It's actually 1,903 feet long. Again, we see the drama and the opulence, but it's very, very symmetrical. The three windows in the center on the second floor seem to be the focal point, and that's actually the king's bedroom. The design of the Versailles was started by Louis Lavaux, but he died, and then it was taken over by Jules Hardrin Mansart. And here, again, look inside. When you look on the image on the upper right, this is simply a room within Versailles. You can see how grandly it is decorated. On the ceiling, we have frescoes. There's a very, very large painting on the wall. You can see that compared to the people who are standing there. And then even just the inlaid marble of the walls and the floor itself. The gardens on the bottom right are all part of the design, and again show that the Baroque opulent, the grandeur. Yet it's very symmetrical. They're almost mirror images, and every single plant is placed there on purpose. And then probably the greatest example of this grandeur is the Hall of Mirrors, which you can see on the left. This was designed in 1680, and it's a large hallway. It's 240 feet long, 43 feet high, and 34 feet wide. And what you see, there are actually 17 large arched windows that overlook the gardens you see on the right. It's called the Hall of Mirrors because exactly opposite each of the 17 windows, there are 17 mirrors on the opposite wall, and that's what you can see here. So you have the large windows letting in the light, letting you see the gardens, and then that's again reflected in the windows itself. You can also see the very large crystal chandeliers that hang within this. And again, all of this was to show the power of the king. Now we're going to shift our focus to music. Again, we're looking at the date 1600 to about 1750. Now, when we usually talk about classical works, we usually are referring to the works of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. However, when in music, when we talk about classical music, we're actually referring to the music that started in the time of the Baroque. Here, music was widely used in churches to help make worship more appealing to the people through the use of emotion and theatrical qualities. Again, in music, we're going to see these Baroque ideas of grandeur, of drama, of opulence. This is also a time period where we see the rise of opera. Music at this time is written for specific instruments or even specific voices, and we have had a lot of technical advancements in instruments. Some terms you should probably know. Sonata is any piece of music played on instruments. A cantata is a sung piece with instrumental accompaniment. And a concerto was works that were composed for specific occasions in the instrumental form, usually made of 3 parts or movements. The first was very energetic and spirited. The second movement is slower, but then with increasing tension. And then finally, the third movement was even more vigorous than the first, releasing those tensions that were built earlier. We're going to see or hear the drama created in the works through these different sudden changes and dynamics in the music. The first composer that we're going to talk about is Antonio Vivaldi, 1675, we think, to 1741. He was from Venice. Interesting enough, Vivaldi was actually an ordained priest. In his lifetime, he wrote 450 concertos, 40 operas, and then numerous other vocal and chamber works. Vivaldi probably is most well known for his The Four Seasons, 1735. And here I have a YouTube link, but I'm going to play you a little bit from Spring. Again, this was music that he composed, and you're supposed to think of specific scenes, but there's not any vocal in it. So again, this is part of Spring. So you can hear the music gets quieter and softer, and then all of a sudden shift in dynamics, and the tension rises. Next, we have Johann Sebastian Bach, 1685 to 1750, and like Vivaldi, he was a very prolific composer. He wrote works probably for almost all forms of music except operas. His works, again, they create drama and tension within the music, and many of his works were polyphonic, meaning they were made for multiple voices. Here I'm going to play you, there's the clip, and then also I'll play you a little bit. This is from the Brandenburg Concertos. And then finally, we're going to hear George Frederick Handel, 1685 to 1759. He was German, but then he moved to England. And here within his works, we're going to listen to an oratorio, which combined sacred subject matter, but with poetic text. It was written for a performance, yet we don't have actors or scenery or even costumes. It's the music and the voices themselves that tell the story. And here we're going to listen to part of Messiah from 1741. It's made of three parts. The first part tells of the birth of Jesus. The second part tells of Jesus' death and resurrection. And the third part is the redemption of humanity. So this work actually includes about 50 individual pieces, and it lasts the entire performance about 3 hours. What's interesting enough is he actually composed this in just 23 days. It was first performed in Dublin in 1742. Here you're going to see again that opulence and the drama created by the very shifting dynamics of the work and the use of the chorus. What we are going to listen to is probably the most famous section from it, which is the Hallelujah chorus. And this is from the climax of the second part. So even in that short section that I played for you there, you can hear that opulence, that drama, the tension within the work. And you can listen. The entire clip is on the link here, and it's only about 4.5 minutes long. Next, your textbook goes through various thinkers and scientific exploration of the time. I would like you to read that just so more of a historical sense of what was going on, but it's not something you'll be quizzed over. And then lastly, we have literature. Literature of the time, again, reflected the religious turmoil. We have different things like the death of Queen Elizabeth in 1603 turned many of the writings from love to inner questioning. We usually will see the use of irony and paradox at the time. And you're going to see the different thinkers, and you should know who some of these are. Jean Locke, Molière, John Donne, Anna Bradstreet, John Milton, famous for writing Utopia, and Cervantes. Cervantes' most famous work is The Tale of Don Quixote. And this was written in two parts in 1605 and 1615, and it tells the tale of Don Quixote and his journeys through life. So these are works, again, I'm not going to quiz you over them, but please do read the section because you should be familiar with who these individuals are. Now that wraps up our lecture on the Baroque. Next time we're going to move into the Enlightenment, and I want you to pay attention to, within the Enlightenment, we have two very strong artistic styles, the Rococo and the Neoclassical. Pay attention to how these two styles are very, very different from each other.